Hi, I'm Jim Pence, and welcome to this week's See the Light Art Tip. Well, as you can see by everything we've got on the table here, we're going to be talking about watercolor today. And I love watercolors. I used to be afraid of it because if you talk to very many people about watercolors, a lot of times what you'll hear is that watercolors are very difficult to control and they're the hardest thing to work with. Don't even go there. But my experience has been watercolors are one of the most enjoyable media to work in. And I especially like it because cleanup is a whole lot easier. I used to do a lot of work in oil paints, and the problem with oils is a lot of cleanup afterwards. With water, it's a whole lot easier, but I also just like the effect. I like to be able to do skies in such a way that there's a vibrancy and aliveness to the picture that you just don't get easily with oil. Today we're going to talk about a few different things related to watercolor, and then in our tip next week I'm going to show you how to do a color wheel. But before we jump into watercolor, I want to talk about some of the supplies, some of the things that you will need, and just what does it cost and how much money do you want to spend, and particularly if you're a homeschooling mom thinking about doing watercolors with your children, or maybe you have one child who is more artistically inclined and you want to move on to some specific media, then I'll hopefully give you some tips that will help you make some decisions. So first thing I'm going to do is clear off my table here, so I only have one thing in front of me, and then we'll discuss what you want to get if you're serious about going into watercolors. Well, probably the first question that people ask when they're thinking about getting into watercolors is, what do I buy? And again, that largely depends on if you're doing this for yourself as an adult or if you're teaching a child. We've got several different kinds here. These are the standard watercolors, and this is probably what most people think about when they think of watercolors, are the little pan watercolors that you find at Walmart or Target or places that sell art supplies and children's supplies. These are very inexpensive, but you get what you pay for. The pigment quality isn't as good, and for a young child, this is probably still where you want to go. There's no need to spend a lot of money for a very young child. But if you or your child are a little bit further along and interested in being a little bit more advanced, then I really recommend you stay away from these. So let's just take those off the table here. That leaves us with two different kinds. There's another kind of pan watercolor. These are a little higher end. This particular box was I think $13 and again, I got this at Walmart. I don't know if all of them carry them, but the neat thing with these, among other things, is that the pans are removable. See, I just took my cobalt blue out. And why would you say is that exciting? Well, it's exciting because if you run out of a color, you don't have to buy a whole new box. You can go online to an online art supply or go to a art supply store that sells these, and you can just replace the pan, snap it in, and you're ready to go again. But also, these particular kinds of watercolors, again, the pigment quality is a little bit better, and you're going to have a lot brighter colors, a lot nicer effect with these. I like to use these particularly if I'm traveling somewhere and I don't want to lug around a whole lot of art supplies, but I do want to paint. Well, I'll take this with me. You notice it's got a real nice little fine tip brush there, and then all I need is a little bit of water and some paper, and I can paint. And if you come and see me at a homeschool conference, I'm probably going to have this out there, and I'll be painting and drawing, and I hope you will come by and see me one of these times. I'll be at 4 homeschool conferences this year. So this is the maker is, you can't see it on the front, but it's Dollar Rowney, or DALER-ROWNEY, and you can buy these or something similar again at an art supply store or online. Let's take those out of the way because I'm not going to use those today. What I have here are tube watercolors, and in tube watercolors you can find actually several different levels of quality too. There are these are what are called student grade, which again the price is lower. You're going to pay on average a couple of dollars per tube depending on the color. There is also sort of an intermediate grade, and then they will have a professional grade. And the main difference again is the quality of the pigment, the color fastness, just the overall quality of your final product. With the professional grades, you're going to be spending sometimes $12, $15 for a single tube, a single color. So if you're going with tubes and you're just learning, go with the student grade, go with the basic ones. The color quality may not be quite as good, but it's still going to be better certainly than the little pans that you would use that you pick up at the local store. So that's the kind of colors that you can use. Now what about paper? Paper is probably one of the most important areas in watercolor if you want to get something that you're going to be happy with. It's possible to go into, again, an art supply store and just buy a watercolor tablet that looks good, but a lot of times the quality of the paper isn't very good, and you will find that the cheaper the paper you use, the more difficult it's going to be as a rule to work with the watercolors. This is one time where you really don't want to skimp. There are a number of different good papers out there. What I use is what's called Arches 140-pound cold press paper. 140 pound is the weight. I know you can't see this directly, but this almost feels like cardstock. It's got a little bit of a tooth to it, and that's the difference between cold press and hot press paper. Hot press paper is going to be smooth, and cold press is rough, has a little bit of a tooth. This is 100% cotton rag, so you can soak this in a sink and get it completely wet. It's not going to fall apart like regular paper will. It's going to hold up to the color, to everything that you're doing with it. If you want to go one step up higher, you go with 300-pound paper instead of 140-pound. And the difference will be if you're working with the 140-pound paper. If you're working on a really long sheet, a really big sheet of paper, then it's going to tend to buckle if you get it really wet. If you work with 300-pound paper, that's not likely to happen. So if you're working with lighter paper like this here, and you're working in a big format, then you'll need to stretch the paper. And in a lesson down the line, or a video tip down the line, I'll show you how to stretch your watercolor paper. Okay, what about brushes? Well, I've got a number of different brushes here, and there are all sorts of brushes that you can use. I'm certainly not going to go into all of them. Again, what we think of a lot of times when we think of a watercolor brush is a big round brush that can soak up a lot of water, and you definitely want one or more of those. I use flat brushes. These are artificial. They're nylon, but they're made to look like and work like sable brushes. I like to do fine detail in watercolor, so I'm going to use some rounds that are more sharp tip. There are all sorts of different things that you can do. You want to have a wide brush. This is a big wide flat brush, and that's for getting the paper nice and wet. So that's just a simple list of some of the supplies that you're going to need. All right, now next week I'm going to show you how to do a color wheel, but today I thought we'd just have a little fun, and I'd show you why I really enjoy working with watercolors. I've taken 3 colors, and there are primary colors: red, yellow, and blue, and what we're going to do is just play with those. I'm going to put them over here. Got a little bit of water. Incidentally, here's a fun little tip for holding my water. I found that when you go to the store and buy a whole bunch of CDs or DVDs, they come in these tall cylinders. Well, whenever you're done with that particular bunch of CDs, the cover from the cylinder works great for holding water for watercolor. So that's what I'm using to hold my water. You always want to use a whole lot of water, or you want to keep a lot of water to clean your brush out with. Over here you can't see them very well, but I've got just some dried out baby wipes. This is another recycling thing. I as a chalk artist, I keep a supply of baby wipes on hand to wipe my hands after I do a drawing, but often the container will dry out and then I'm stuck with all of these baby wipes. Well, I don't have to throw them away. I just move them over to my watercolor section of my studio, because these are perfect for kind of blotting your brush out with. So I'm going to take my big wide brush. I'm going to just get it in here and get the paper nice and wet. What I usually tell my students when I am teaching watercolors is, most of the time what I'm looking for when I'm wetting a piece of paper like this is I want it glistening, but I don't want puddles. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to look at it, and I'll even hold it up a little bit, sometimes pull some of that extra water off. I just want a nice glisten to it. Now, I'm not trying to paint anything in particular today. This is literally fun with colors, and again, this is one of the reasons I love watercolor, because you can just come in and play and have fun, and you never know quite what you're going to come up with. So I'm going to take my brush, this is my round brush, and I'm going to go in to my red right over here, and I'm just going to pull it in, and again, not really trying to do anything in particular. I'm just throwing it in there. I'm going to come down here, throw a little bit more red in, and of course, since I have my paper nice and wet, that red is just spreading out and going everywhere, and that's exactly what I want. I might put another down here. You know, these may end up as flowers, who knows. Okay, so I'm going to go back and clean out my water. Now, normally I'd have two containers of water, one clean and one dirty, but I don't have enough room on my table here, so I just have a dirty water. So that's not really good, but for what I'm doing today, it doesn't matter a whole lot. Okay, I'm going to go into my yellow next. Get in there, and again, just dabbing in. You know, it's having some fun. Now, when you get down there, that yellow is going to mix a little bit with the red. You're going to end up with a little orange. So I'm going to come down here, dabbing. Nice. That's one of the reasons that watercolor is great for younger children too, because you can just have fun creating, even if they're not really at a point where they can do a lot of representational art, where they can draw specific things. You can just go in and see what the colors do, see what the what the paper does when you get it wet. Okay, now I'm going to go in and get into my blue. Now, obviously, when I go into my blue here, I'm gonna when it hits that yellow, it's going to turn a little bit green in some places, and that's okay. Now, you see my paper is already starting to dry out a little bit, so that's why the blue is not spreading quite as rapidly as the red did. When the red started out, it really spread. And I'm getting a little bit too much water there, so I'm going to blot my brush out. I'm just going to kind of take that out. Again, not trying to do anything in particular, just having fun. But in a succeeding week, we may come back to this and see if we can use our creativity and make it into something. So here I've just done a number of different colors, just had some fun with color. Okay, now you can, I've got a little bit more color, a little less water there. So as I dab, it's getting a little darker. And I'm just going to come in here, hit it a couple places. And I think I'm going to stop at that point. All right, I have no idea what that is, but it was fun drawing it or painting it. Actually, this almost looks like modern art painting over here. We'll come back to that in a succeeding week and play with it a little bit more. See if we can use our imagination and turn that into something. But for now, that was just a real quick demo of what watercolor does when it hits a wet piece of paper. Next week, I'll show you how to do a color wheel. Color wheels are a great way of learning what colors do. Here's one I did a while back. And you can actually, in fact, I've done them with actually different combinations of colors because there are a lot of different varieties of red and blue, and you can see the different kinds of results that you get depending on the colors that you use. And that's important if you're going to do a lot of painting, because that way you'll know what colors are going to create the effects that you want. Well, that's about all our time for today. I hope you've had fun. I hope you'll try this. Get some watercolor paper, and for this kind of work, you don't even really need the expensive watercolor paper. But again, the better the supplies that you use, the more fun, or the better the results are going to be. You'll have fun either way. But I hope you'll go out and have some fun. Keep drawing, keep painting, and I'll see you next week.